You know what I'm going to do? Go back to the book right now. Here we go. They were called legs or grunts. To carry something was to hump it, as when Lieutenant Jimmy Cross humped his love for Martha up the hills and through the swamps. Almost everyone humped photographs. In his wallet, Lieutenant Cross carried 2 photographs of Martha. As a first lieutenant and platoon leader, Jimmy Cross carried a compass, map, code books, binoculars, and a .45 caliber pistol that weighed 2.9 pounds fully loaded. He carried a strobe light and the responsibility for the lives of his men. As an RTO, Mitchell Sanders carried the PRC-25 radio, a killer, 26 pounds with its battery. As a medic, Rat Kiley carried a canvas satchel filled with morphine and plasma and malaria tablets and surgical tape and comic books and all the things a medic must carry, including M&Ms for especially bad wounds, for a total weight of nearly 18 pounds. As a big man, therefore a machine gunner, Henry Dobbins carried the M60. Which weighed 23 pounds unloaded, but which was almost always loaded. In addition, Dobbins carried between 10 and 15 pounds of ammunition draped in belts across his chest and shoulders. They all carried ghosts. When dark came, they would move out single file across the meadows and paddies to their ambush coordinates, where they would quietly set up the claymores and lie down and spend the night waiting. In that section, when I was reading that, clearly this is very similar to the operations that you conducted a ton of, which was, they're calling them ambushes here, and we called them sniper overwatches. But the idea for those of what was happening is very, very similar. You guys are patrolling out to a location just like you talked about and setting up for remain over day or for the night. How did you feel like, you kind of talked about it, but did you feel like you were ready for that stuff? And, a lot of times, like you said, we trained to drive a lot, and we ended up walking so much because of the IED threat. How did you manage that once you got on the ground?
Well, I think, thank God, we had actually trained, and it's been a part of the SEAL team since Vietnam. Going out in the Southern California desert and training in land warfare. Is that awesome block where you go out and learn how to patrol, which we've talked. You talked a lot about in the podcast, and certainly we talk about with Echelon Front. Where it's man camp out in the Southern California desert in this rugged environment with just sharp rocks and cactus with spines and rattlesnakes.
So real quick, everybody in the world, when they hear the term Southern California, they think of Baywatch, right?
Yeah.
They think of Baywatch. We ain't talking about Baywatch. So when you go east from the coast in Southern California, you enter places that have names like Death Valley, right? Those are the kind of areas we're talking about. We're not talking about SoCal Baywatch. We're talking about inland in the deserts, the hard deserts of California, and it's one of the primary places where we train for combat. And it is, I always used to say that our desert training facility is where men become frogmen. Even though there's no water out there, it's where men become frogmen, because it'll test you.
No doubt. And I, thank God that we get tested like that, and that kind of training is something that's kept SEALs alive on the battlefield and enabled us to accomplish some great things for a long time. And I remember that first shakeout patrol.
That was a good one.
The land warfare instructors, we're fired up to get out in the desert to train, get our land warfare on, dial it in, our procedures, and learn how to work together as a team and patrol. And we show up to the camp.
It was funny because generally, I'm not going to say that you have this immense trust with the cadre, but we're kind of friends with all these guys. We know them, and so they did a really good job of suckering us in on that first patrol, because they said, hey, we're just going to send you guys out on a little shakeout patrol tonight. And so a shakeout patrol in the SEAL teams means you're going to put your gear on. You want to see how everything rides on your body. You want to make sure that it's comfortable. You want to make sure that there's no, tags that are wearing on you or anything like that. That's just a shakeout patrol. Get your little hand signals. Make sure we're all good to go. Get to know each other a little bit. It's just like a little. It's basically like a little walk, like a little walk. I mean, you think it's probably going to take a shakeout patrol? Should probably take hour, maybe 2 hours at the most. We're just going to be, kind of relaxed mode, doing a little shakeout patrol. So and that was the setup. And it's administrative, right? So you're like, hey, let's work on this, let's that. So it's not like you're in the game acting like you're in enemy territory the whole time, and it's, so you're kind of talking with instructors and figuring things out. So yeah, so they're like, oh yeah, just the land warfare cadre, like, yeah, just a little shakeout patrol, no big deal. So we're just showing up. No one's got their. So I know I didn't have my gear situated. I grabbed some stuff that I'd had from advanced training, what we call SQT, SEAL qualification training from like 2 years before that. And I had these 2 canteens that had been filled with water in that gear. And I don't think I'd emptied that water in like 2 years. So there's probably a little algae growth and some nastiness going on in these canteens. So I just throw it, okay, we'll shake out patrol, and then we were rushed because they were like, hey, we got to get this going, So we arrive, guys are trying to get settled, and they're like, hey, get your gear on, let's get over there. So we throw our gear on, and I throw on that gear with those canteens with this 2-year-old water in it, and we take off on the patrol. And what we didn't know was that. This shakeout patrol was a man test. It was a man test. And what a word we like to use in the SEAL teams called the mud suck, which is basically a sucker punch, right? They put together a patrol that it took hours and hours. Well, it took the whole night. The whole cycle of darkness.
The whole night. And no one had, several guys didn't have any water. I remember Ryan Job had no water at all. Yeah. And I remember him just struggling. Was like, hey, sir, do you have some water for me? And I actually came up to you, I think, right?
Because you said no one had water, and actually I had water. I was going on it. To me, it was like shakeout patrol. Of course, even though I was like, oh, it's kind of administrative. Of course, in my mind, I'm like, hey, it's a shakeout patrol, but I'm doing everything the way I would do it normally because I'm super hardcore. So I got all my stuff the way it's supposed to. And also I had the advantage of having done a lot of these trips in my time. So for me, it wasn't trying anything new. It wasn't a shakeout patrol for me. It was just a patrol. But yeah, I went, got good water in my canteens, my Camelback, and I was all good to go. And I was ready for this. And because discipline equals freedom, you had the freedom to go out and execute with your water. Meanwhile, I'm carrying these canteens that I know Did you say you first sip, you spit it out?
I actually got so thirsty, right, that finally I was like, I gotta drink something. And so I pull one of these canteens out. Again, it's just nasty algae. I open it up. I smell it. I was like, man, it smells like a fish aquarium, And but I'm at this point I'm desperate, right? I'm desperate 2 or 3, 4 hours into this thing. Everyone's sweat. So I was like, I take a big sip of this thing, and it just immediately projectile vomit that stuff back up. I think I gave one of those canteens to Ryan because he was just desperate. But I asked you for water.
How'd that work?
Didn't I ask you for water?
You did.
I was like, hey, Jocko, do you have any water?
And I was like, yes. I was like, yes, I do. And you said, can you? Your voice was scratching me the whole 9 yards. You were dehydrated. You're like, can you give some of that to Ryan? He didn't bring any water. And I said something along the lines of, well, firstly, I said, no, you can't have any of my water. If you want water, you must hump it in. I don't hump in your water, and I'm not humping in Ryan's water. That doesn't work this way. You bring in your own water. And then I think I said, if he's going to die, I will give you some water. If he's not going to die, you will get nothing. And he got nothing. So, just so everybody understands, it is pretty. If you can't carry your own stuff in, right? It's pretty taboo to have to depend on somebody else. And
right?
No kidding, at that point, we didn't actually know. I didn't know how long we were going to be in the field for. I mean,
they were keeping us in the dark.
They didn't tell us what was going on, and
they
did a really good job of. They brought us into the hills of Southern California, where you're going to be going up and down terrain, and the terrain is uneven. And they did this whole link-up drill. So it wasn't like we were just blindly walking. It was link-up from starting with swim pairs, and then fire team link-up, and then squad link-up, and then platoon link-up. And, yeah, so the future was very unknown at this time. So I wasn't, thinking, hey, I'll just give a bunch of my water away because...
Yeah, you give all your water away, and then you got nothing, and then you're struggling to keep up too. So it was a bad situation, and it was.
Am I an asshole? I think I might just have peaked a little bit, at least getting in the zone. A
little bit. It was definitely borderline. But look, I think the reality was you were helping reinforce the lesson that you got to have your gear squared away. Yeah. You got to be ready, and you got to be ready for a contingency like that. Because that happened all the time to us. Where we like, hey, this is going to be, obviously we're in Ramadi and we're like, hey, this is going to be a 24-hour operation. Like, no, now it's a 48-hour operation. Now it turns into a 72-hour operation. We're gonna stay here longer than we thought. So you got to have you got to be squared away. You got to be thinking about that. And thank God we had such awesome, amazing leaders like Tony Afrati. Who's been on this podcast and that people love, and
which is why we can say his name, because otherwise we'd name off all the other guys that were out there good, the LPOs that getting after it, the E5 mafia in there running things. So yeah, it's the whole crew.
And that's exactly, and just leaders at every level that were stepping up, leading their fire teams, leading their squad. And I think that was it. Thank God, I appreciate as much as that sucked, and as much as people were complaining about that at the time, those kind of training scenarios where we didn't see it coming and it was a lot harder than we thought it was going to be, it got us ready. For those long range patrols in Ramadi. And when we got there, like you said, we all thought we were going to drive, and they were like, well, we can't drive. Man, that's the best way to get killed if you want to try to drive into some of these areas. So park your vehicles and walk in on foot. And again, we learned we only had to carry the essential stuff, but we also knew we had to carry some firepower too, because one of the things that we did in Ramadi was, I think oftentimes special operators can get a little spoiled where, if you're going out on a mission and it's got some higher profile and you've got aircraft supporting you and you're going to have all this, you've got close air support set up where it's just dedicated to you, and here we are, we had 40 SEALs in tasking at Bruiser, so I'm leading a 16-man SEAL platoon and maybe a couple other augments, with SEALs and our EOD bomb disposal technicians and Iraqi soldiers. And we're just one tiny unit out of 5,600 troops, Marines and soldiers of the 1st Brigade, 1st Armored Division, Brigade Combat Team. So there isn't dedicated aircraft to us. There isn't a QRF that's a quick reaction force that's dedicated just to us to come out.
Yeah, because on top of it, we had our unit, and just because you were out with your platoon in a firefight, you were not the only game in town at that time. There would be 3 or 4 other units somewhere else on the battlefield that were in a firefight, maybe worse, maybe not as bad, but there was always someone that's calling the QRF or that needs air support. So it was exactly like you're saying, we weren't at the top of some food chain. We were just in the food chain and had to learn how to mitigate that stuff by so that massive loadout that you took and you were heavy, it's not like you said, okay, I'm not going to have to carry this stuff anymore. You still had to bring it.
We had to make sure that we carried our own firepower into those areas in an area where we knew that the tanks may have a hard time getting in there to us, even if in the emergency scenario, and we didn't want to be overrun. 50 enemy fighters trying to overrun our position, and we only got 8 or 10 or 12 guys in this position with some Iraqi soldiers who were pretty much worthless when it came to beating back an enemy attack like that. So,
and by the way, there were many positions, small positions, sniper size elements that were overrun and I know before we showed up, there was an element that disappeared, and they found their bodies months later. But same thing. It was a smaller element of, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 guys in a sniper type element. They got overrun. No one knew what happened to them, and it happened to large fortified positions as well. If you remember some of the checkpoints that were well fortified and built up, and they got completely overrun by Moosh. And so
somebody driving a big 1,000-pound VBIED truck bomb into their position. Horrible. we had to carry all kinds of that firepower with us. We had to carry it on our back. So the belt-fed machine guns, the guys carrying the machine guns that were going to beat back enemy attacks. Carl Gustav was our shoulder-fired. It's a recoilless 84 millimeter recoilless rifle that we use, and it's heavy, super heavy. It's great against enemy tanks. The Muj didn't have any tanks, so it was probably a lot heavier than what we needed. Our leading petty officer would just man up, BTF, and carry that thing in. And he figured out pretty quick, though, that I think the first time he tried to carry it in, they were on a long range foot patrol and going into an area that was a rural area a little bit outside the city. And so now, we were used to patrolling the city streets in this rural area, MC1 that was kind of out east of Ramadi. Now you're talking about patrolling in through farm fields and flooded areas where you might be an ankle or knee deep mud.
It looked like Vietnam.
It looked like
Vietnam. Every war movie that you see about Vietnam. In fact, we used to call it Viet-Ram.
Viet-Ram. That's what we call it. And it was just like that. I mean, my first patrol that I went on out there, we're literally wading through irrigated fields through mud and wading through canals, because there's all these little canals that are coming off the river to irrigate the fields, and there was some Marines supporting us, so we had a Huey helicopter and a Cobra gunship, which are Vietnam era platforms.
Yes.
And I was like, man, am I in Iraq right now or Vietnam? This is great. There were people out tilling the fields with like an ox.
Yeah.
I mean, it looked like something straight out of
it was actually
Vietnam.
crazy out there in MC1 how much it looked like Vietnam. It was nuts.
It was nuts, and it was not anything that we'd expected to do. Certainly, so we just had to prepare for that contingency and figure out a way to to operate in that environment. But our LPO is carrying that big man rocket, but he recognized right away. Like initially, he tried to carry some rounds in his backpack, and each of the I don't even know what this thing weighs, but it's got to be what it's got to be. I think the weapon itself probably weighs 25 pounds, and each of the rounds has got to weigh 10 or 12 pounds, and maybe 15 pounds, I don't know. But so when you load that thing, initially carried it in loaded and then put it around his backpack, and it just weighed him down. He couldn't do it. So, it was hard keeping up. So he recognized, I'm going to carry it empty. I'll carry it in my hand. I'll put one round in my backpack that I can use, and then we'll put another. I always carried a round in my rucksack as well, that I could hand off to those gunners if they needed it. But that gave us some firepower to be able to beat back an enemy attack, and we had to carry that stuff in on ourselves. So it took one or two guys that could man up and do that, and our LPO was the guy to BTF with that.
Yeah, and you said if you needed, and you needed it a lot because, I don't know if you remember this, but you guys shot the 6-month loadout of Carl Gustav rounds in about a week and a half. So, and then we had to borrow a bunch from the Rangers, and we actually shot their loadout too. So
it was awesome. We actually got the cool airburst rounds from the Rangers, which was awesome.
Yeah, those are effective.
What does that mean? Airburst.
Airburst means that it explodes over the top of. So bad guys are shooting at you from a rooftop, right? Like, and they're hiding behind a wall. You can determine like how far they are and set a timer on there, so it explodes over the top of them.
Damn.
So it's pretty devastating. It's pretty awesome.
We like devastating.
Yeah, man.
TU Bruiser got after it with some Carl G rounds.
Yeah, that's kind of advanced though, like technology-wise, where you can set how far you want it to.
It is advanced. It throws another kind of twist into, you got to.
Yeah.
But it's good to go.
I didn't know it was like that.
Well, they've actually had airburst rounds for a really long time.
Well, we don't hear about them though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know. It's a little advanced in the civilian sector, I guess.
Yeah, man. It's pretty dope though.